And a few more members of the commission will be joining us shortly, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I think as everyone knows, this is the final meeting of the work group to make its recommendations to the full commission. And we have, of course, a full agenda for today's session in preparation of taking our final vote later in the day. So to get us to that point, let me turn to Rachel to start us through the material.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's like we're in school, right? Okay. Okay. So in your folders are various materials that I'm going to walk through with the help of Scott Gates and Justin Silverstein and others. And I think, generally speaking, I would say if you have a question, go ahead and ask it as we go along, as opposed to holding them. But I will say, for starters, that what you do have in front of you is the proposed 10-year phase-in of the recommendations of the commission on a more even, proportionate slide. And for fiscal 21, 22, and 23, we have the county-by-county distributions through the state aid formulas and what the local share of the formulas would be, as well as some comparisons to local appropriations and MOE. And then, of course, we have updated the fiscal 30 numbers at full implementation by county, state, and local. So that's what we've been able to pull together for you for today. Overall, every school system will receive, of course, a significant increase under the Blueprint work group's proposal that is before you than under current law. Current law is growing at about 2% a year, give or take, and under the commission's, or under the Blueprint proposal that is before you, the average growth over the from fiscal 20 to 30 is 5.6% a year. So that is the proportionate increase of 5.6% a year over the 10-year period. That includes both what would have been provided under current law and the additional dollars being provided through the work group's proposal. And that is where this doubling, more than doubling of current law growth comes in, because current law is roughly 2%, a little more than 2%. We're talking about 5.6%. So that's the more than double. And the first...
The addition is 3.
Just on percentages? Yes. There's a long sheet that you have in your folder with the yellow on the top. That is the 10-year phase-in, and it shows you where that 5.6% comes in. Whereas the original commission phase-in proposal, it was very front-loaded, and it also had it was very front-loaded, and then it sort of moderated, and then it grew at the end, whereas this is a more steady growth. Over the first 3 years, so fiscal 21, 22, and 23, it averages at about 5.5%. It's a little more in some years, a little less than others, which takes into account, essentially, to some degree, the dollars that have already been set aside by the legislature to fund the Blueprint during fiscal 20 through 22. And just to remind you, the numbers on this sheet are only state funding, so this does not reflect the local side of the equation yet. In total, by fiscal 2030, state education aid will exceed about $10.2 billion, so it's a $2.8 billion increase in state aid over what would have been provided in current law. And the local governments will be expected to fund the local share of both the existing formulas and the new formulas, nearly all of them, beginning in fiscal 22 under this proposal. And that will total about $8.9 billion in fiscal 2030.
Yes. Yeah, please.
And of the 2.8 increase, the local share of that would be the total.
Of the $2.8 billion increase, I'm sorry, what was the question? The $2.8 billion is state aid.
State.
The $2.8 billion is state aid. So maybe let's go to, you have long sheets in your packets that have a staple. And it says fiscal 2030 model direct state aid.
Right.
Okay. So, and thank you. It's on the screen there. So what this is showing, state aid under the model in fully implemented in fiscal 2030, and we've showed you this before. These numbers are just updated to reflect all the decisions that you've made. And you can see in the second to last column, dollar difference versus fiscal 2030 current. That is where the $2.8 billion increase is over current law in fiscal 2030. And you can see the amount increases in state aid and the percentage increases over fiscal 2030 current law. And in the total direct column, you can see the 10.25 billion. So that's the in excess of 10.2 billion. So this is fiscal 30 fully implemented in fiscal $30. The next sheet shows that same information in fiscal $20. So it's in fiscal $20, it's an $8.3 billion total with a $2.2 billion increase over current law. And then the next page is the local share in fiscal 30. And on this page, what it shows is the local share of all of these formulas in fiscal 30. And it totals the $8.9 billion in fiscal 30. That is different from, that is not the increase in local funding that will be necessary. This is just the local share of all of those formulas. We have another page that provides a little more information on local share. I was going to get to that in a little while, but okay. So, since we're in fiscal 30, so one thing that is shown on the local share page is in the concentration of poverty column, there is $52.7 million. That reflects only requiring counties that are benefiting from the floor, the 40% floor in the commensurate education formula, only requiring those counties to pay the local share of concentration of poverty. For all the other counties, the state is picking up that piece of the cost, which is part of the reason that the fiscal 30 state aid amount is larger than it was last week. So sort of working our way down the overview bullets, still on the first page.
Yes, Secretary Brinkley.
Which would show, I guess, where they are or what the delta would be. Because I didn't see that summarized in there, but you're getting to that later. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to confirm it. I didn't want to belabor it.
Okay. So there's another sheet in your packet. It should be the next one from behind the agenda that says proposed phase-in of state funding. It's from fiscal 20 to 24.
Yes, it says proposed phase-in of state funding fiscal 20 to 24. And it's on the screen now.
And so part of what the staff was tasked with doing for this meeting was coming up with a proposal for you to consider that would provide that more even distribution increase in state funding and local funding, but in phasing in the total cost of the commission's proposals over the first few years of the phase-in. So as I said before, we do have county by county numbers for some of the years, but before we get to that, wanted to talk about this at sort of a higher level. And what this is showing in fiscal 20, this is the blueprint funding that was enacted by the legislature during this past session. And so you can see it totals $251.8 million in state aid, new money that was provided toward the implementing the commission's recommendations in fiscal 20. There's a little more money, about $4 million for some other state categorical programs that is not reflected here because this is only state aid going to the school systems. So you can see how that's been distributed in fiscal 20. And so what we did is we kind of built off of that for fiscal 21 through 24 in terms of what the priorities were that had been funded and other priorities. And for fiscal 21, we are thinking about that as a transition year. So there would be additional funding provided for a couple of programs that I'll talk about in a minute, but the formulas would remain as they are in current law. Beginning in fiscal 22 is when new formulas for the foundation, the targeted programs, the new concentration of poverty, per pupil funding, and other categorical streams of funding, those would all start in fiscal 22 and phase up to fiscal 30. So, for example, you can see in fiscal 21, there are dollars for college and career readiness, about $32 million. This reflects the funding for the dollars that we had talked about going into the base, for every student to get to college and career readiness. And that is the state share of that funding. There's also about $5.2 million in fiscal 21 for teacher supplies and technology. This is also something that we talked about that would go into the per pupil foundation amount. And this provides about $83 per teacher for supplies and technology in fiscal 21. The next line is the continuation of the 3% salary increase funding that was provided in fiscal 20. The line after that, post college and career readiness and CTE pathways. This provides dollars for, this is the $500 for each 11th and 12th grader who is college and career ready to pursue the CTE pathways and also early college pathways, essentially. Below that, there's $58.7 million for concentration of poverty. This is a continuation of the funding that was provided in fiscal 20 under the blueprint. And the growth reflects additional schools coming into the program at the 80% concentration of poverty level. Those schools are receiving the funding for those two positions, the community schools coordinator and the healthcare practitioner. Special education, the funding, the increase that was provided in fiscal 20, $65.5 million, is continued in fiscal 21, as is the transitional supplemental instruction, aka tutoring funds that were provided under the blueprint. And then pre-K, full day pre-K is $52.9 million in fiscal 21. This provides funding for every 4-year-old who is enrolled in public pre-K full day. And so that reflects that increase based on the number of 4-year-olds who are going to be enrolled in fiscal 21. And then in addition, there's the $2 million that was provided so that there was a mental health coordinator in every school system. And so that totals here on this page, it totals about $334 million. In total, it is about $345 million or $355 million. But $345 million, which also reflects a little bit of inflation costs, sort of the normal inflation that in those programs growing.
So, Rachel, you mentioned that we were thinking of 2021 as a transition year, and we would still be using the old formula.
Exactly.
Okay. My question is that because, is that a mechanical issue? That is, the transition to the new formulas will just take that amount of time, or is that tied to the phasing?
It's mostly a technical issue, but it's both. It's really both, okay. In the sense that the way the formulas work and the way the law works, anything that is required that passes in law this coming session would not actually be mandated funding until fiscal 2022.
I got you.
And so the governor, and whatever funds are put into the budget, will be put into the budget based on the existing formulas. And so it's easier, really, to add additional dollars without going in and changing the formulas for the year that the budget is being considered.
But the blueprint recommendations would be off and running in 2021, even though we were still using the old.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And in fact, they already are in
Right.
fiscal 2020.
Exactly.
Under the blueprint.
So
exactly.
the other question I had was in the bill, the blueprint bill, money was identified. I don't know what the term of art is in 2021. And is that 334 consistent with that amount of money?
It is.
Okay.
The funding was identified to cover about $355 million of costs. What is not shown on this page in fiscal 21, because we didn't want to confuse everyone, although I think there's a risk either way, is there in fiscal 21, their declining enrollment grants are still being funded. So we know that starting in fiscal 22, we're going to start funding through the foundation program, the greater of the September 30 enrollment or the rolling 3-year average. Mm-hmm. You all decided that. So that cost is included in this proposal starting in fiscal 22. In fiscal 21, we're still in the world where we're providing this additional add-on declining enrollment grant for the counties that have a higher enrollment using the 3-year average.
Right.
And that was originally estimated to be a cost of $16.7 million in fiscal 2021. We will not know until we get the September 30 enrollment counts from this fall what the full cost of those grants is going to be for fiscal 2021. But that is funded in fiscal 21, but it is not shown on this page because it's sort of a one-time grant under the blueprint. Moving in.
Yes, yes.
You sure? Okay. So then beginning in fiscal 22, as I said, the proposal is to begin phasing in the new formulas and changes to the formulas. So, for example, the college and career readiness funds continue on, and they will be rolled into the foundation program, as we showed you in the per pupil foundation amounts. This is the state share. That is the state share of those dollars. The teacher supplies and technology, the state share of those dollars will be rolled into the foundation amount. You can see it's half of the amount provided in 21. In fiscal 21, essentially, the proposal is that the dollars, that the state would be providing additional dollars. There would be no required additional local contribution in fiscal 21 for these funds, other than the current maintenance of effort requirement. So there would be no change to local contributions for fiscal 2021 beyond what would already be required in current law. Starting in fiscal 22, under the proposal, the counties would be putting in the local share of all of the formulas, or MOE, whichever is the higher amount. In 22, then, you can see the next line down, teacher salary increase. This would provide in 22, the increase reflects the next 3%. The commission had recommended a total of a 10% teacher salary increase to bring salaries up to comparable to other professionals and also Massachusetts and New Jersey. And so the fiscal 22 amount would allow for a 3% salary increase beginning in January of 2022. And then in fiscal 23, it would provide for so the commission's proposal was 3%, 3%, 4%. The last 4% is spread out between 23 and 24, so it would be 2% in January of 2023, and then another 2% in January of 2024.
Is that an example of
Smoothing?
Smoothing?
Okay. Yes, exactly. The next line down, the post-college and career ready and CTE pathways, you can see in fiscal 22 the amount is a little more than half. This reflects only the state share being paid through the formula. This would be for college and career readiness and CTE pathways. This would be a new formula, a separate formula that would be funded based on the number of 10th graders or 11th grade, the number of 10th graders who are college and career ready at the end of 10th grade. The concentration of poverty is the next line. And I'm actually going to ask Justin to talk through this one, please.
So in 2022, what we've done is in 2020 and 2021, we are funding those schools who have at least 80% of their students in poverty or above with the 2 positions. What we are beginning to add in 22 is some of the per pupil funding. And so there's an additional $31 million. The way that we've looked at this is for every district, we've looked at the proportional share of that funding that would go to schools above 80% and distributed that $31 million equally. And so if you have any schools who are above 80%, which is a flat per pupil amount, per reduced price lunch amount, you receive some of the funding. And so we're starting to just implement that per pupil funding in just an equitable basis across all the schools.
That was in fiscal,
That's in fiscal 22. Do you want me to walk through 23 and 24?
yes, please.
Okay. Then in 23, we are beginning to add additional pot of money. We're increasing the pot of money for per pupil for those above schools above 80%, and we're also bringing in the 2 positions for schools that are above 70%, along with some funding. So that's in that year. And then in 2024, we are continuing the positions for all the schools above 70%, increasing the pot again for those schools above 80%, and starting to bring in some per pupil funding for schools that are above the 75%. So we're trying to figure out how we can start to bring in more and more of the schools, both on the positions and the per pupil funding over time as we move towards FY30.
So Justin, is this another example of the smoothing?
Yes.
Okay, so more of these funds were packed in the earlier years, and you've spread them out over 3 years, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think, as Rachel's mentioned a couple times, it's important to remember on the positions, that is for everybody state funding. For the per pupil amount, it is state funding, except for districts who receive the floor, then they will have a local match.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justin, you covered that we would reach the 70% threshold in FY23. Do we not reach the 55% envisioned in the recommendations until FY30, or does it happen sooner than that, but just later than FY24?
It is the 55% will be in the out years, but it will happen before FY30. Though again, it's the full funding piece will happen in FY30. What we're trying to do is model out basically bringing in another tier of schools basically each year as we go forward. There's just the balance between what can you put in the per pupil funding and what and when you do the full positions, because the full positions we are not taking a percentage of it. It's on or off, so they tend to cost a little bit more when you bring in another set of schools.
And is it envisioned that we go from 80 to 70 to 65 to 60 to 55, or what's that slope look like in terms of bringing in the positions? I understand the per pupil funding piece.
Jump in here and help Justin out. We have our little schedule here. So they're 5%, so it would go down in 5% bands. So the 75 to 80, then 70 to 75. In fiscal 24, we get the positions, and then the next year they would begin to get per pupil funding. So in fiscal 27, the schools between 55 and 60 would get the positions, and in fiscal 28, starting in fiscal 28, they would get some per pupil funding under what we're proposing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to a degree, what's happening with the concentration in poverty grant is similar to the implementation of pre-K in that it's a gradual phase-in.
Essentially, what we've tried to do in a somewhat targeted way is gradually phase in elements of all the different policy areas. So that, because we know that what the Commission's proposal is a systemic set of recommendations, and achieving the results is dependent on all of those pieces moving forward. And so exactly, we tried to sort of incrementally move everything along within this new phase-in proposal, which has the growth more proportionate.
Can you speak to the plan around, I mean, this is where sort of policy and money gets interwoven, in that in the recommendation from the Kerwin report includes a governance body or some oversight entity around accountability. As the phase-in happens, I would imagine that the governing board is looking at the actual implementation. So not sort of how did we do in 10 years, but on a quarterly or, half-year basis, checking in to say, if you have a lot of funds come in to employ community school coordinators, are those coordinators actually hired? Or was there a supply? Or the health practitioners, which is, I know, been an issue, just sort of the supply of healthcare professionals, that would be happening through the phase-in as part of this, which would be very different from the Thornton formula that was just sort of a formula basis at the end. This would be much more accountable, targeted, purposeful funding for outcomes.
So I think I'm glad you asked that question. I think one of the benefits of a more slow phase-in is it allows the school systems to have time to plan, develop their implementation plan. So what the Commission's recommendations called for is that every LE will develop every school system will develop an implementation plan, and that would show how they plan to implement the recommendations within each of the policy areas over the whole 10-year period. And that would then be reviewed and approved by the new governing board, the oversight board in the Commission's terminology. And then each year, that board would be looking at the progress that each LEA was making against their approved plan and how the dollars were being spent. And at the same time, and I should also mention, some of the funding, while we're still accounting for the spending, the dollars that relate to funding the oversight board, some of the infrastructure and capacity that we know we need to build out, are not reflected in these numbers because these only reflect the dollars that are going to the school systems, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't reflect other state spending that will be happening under the Commission's recommendations. So one thing the Commission recommended was starting to build out what they called expert review teams. These are teams of professionals and in some cases within the state, existing professionals in school systems who would be visiting schools around the state and observing what was going on in those schools, how the dollars were being spent, what the outcomes were, and essentially reporting back on at the school level on the degree to which a school was implementing recommendations and making progress. And if that wasn't happening, there's sort of a series of steps that would occur under the Commission's recommendations.
Thank you.
Yes, Secretary Foster.
So, Rachel, could you just expand on that and tell us essentially what would happen if there's non-compliance and what those steps are that would have to be complied with?
So what the Commission envisioned is that the review teams would make recommendations to the school system, other stakeholders in the community and the state. And the school's leadership would have the opportunity to review those recommendations and determine what pieces of it they wanted to implement or if they had other ideas for different things to do to improve their outcomes. And then if the review team still did not feel that the progress was being made sufficient and that the dollars were not being spent perhaps the way they could be better spent, then it's sort of a scaling up of, first their kind of recommendations, then they become a little stronger in terms of, we want to see you doing this. And if the school is either not doing that, then it becomes a potential of the withholding of dollars to that school until the dollars are spent on the best practices and the things that the commission is recommending, evidence-based research that is working in other schools and systems around the country and the world. So it's sort of an escalating series of recommendations that become requirements and dollars that have to follow those requirements or recommendations.
Opportunity for correction.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
I think we can move on.
Okay. As we know, the commission also recommended additional dollars for English learners, for special education, and so the next two lines on the sheet that we've been walking through start in fiscal 22 starts to provide additional dollars for English learners, which grows to $60 million in addition to current law by fiscal 24. And again, with special education, it would provide $106.5 million more by fiscal 24 than current law. The transitional supplemental instruction, the commission's recommendation was to phase up to full implementation, which is the roughly $93 million total cost, half of it, $46 million state cost. In the commission's recommendations, the phase up is a little faster than what we're proposing, and then it phases down because it is transitional in the sense that it's intended to sort of provide this additional assistance for students who are not on grade level by grade 3 in reading and in math, and with reading being the priority. And so the idea is that as the whole system is being implemented, the need for those transitional dollars goes away. We have, because the phase up is going to be slower under this proposal, we're also going to slow down the phase out in the intervening years before fiscal 30. Pre-kindergarten is growing to about $96 million by fiscal 24. This does not reflect the additional $26.6 million that the state is currently fully funding now, or previously federal funds were covering a portion of it, for pre-K expansion grants. Ultimately, those expansion grants would get rolled into the new full-day pre-K formula, but during this phase-in period, the pre-K expansion grants will continue on they're funded right now at $26.6 million a year, and those dollars will be targeted to converting half-day slots to full-day slots for 4-year-olds and creating or funding new slots both in the public schools and with the community providers.
Yes. Senator Ferguson.
And what happens with child care subsidy?
Child care subsidy is in, so there are no increased dollars going to child care subsidy under this proposal. The legislature has passed legislation that increased the subsidy for the market rate and also opened up additional, some of the tiers that were frozen. And MSD through regulations has done more of that. So under what I would call current law now, child care subsidy is growing substantially, dollars available for child care subsidy. Ultimately, this will free up some of those additional child care subsidy dollars, because dollars that today might go for a 4-year-old for who is not in pre-K, but they're in child care, those dollars under the proposal, the funding for the pre-K is going to come now through this formula for the 4-year-olds. And so for the dollars that they would have used from child care subsidy will be still available for before and after care, but it also should free up additional dollars to go towards child care subsidy.
Yes, Senator Conway.
In terms of the pre-K and not so much child care subsidy, and I understand the system that you have because you said the expansion grants are still in place. But did you finally find out from the last session exactly where, since we were not counting pre-K in any of our numbers or kindergarten, where they factor in to the poverty piece of it, the poverty grants? Because the last time we discussed, you said they weren't being counted. So in terms of the poverty index, where does these students come in? Are they still not counted?
Right. So in the data that is currently collected, 4-year-olds are not part of the free and reduced price meal count, to the best of my knowledge. So we don't have that data. It doesn't exist currently. It can be collected for the future, but
Let me just ask you this. I understand what you're saying, you don't have the data. But if these same students are part of subsidized child custody, couldn't you get some of the data from there to include them in the concentration of poverty?
we can certainly look at that. I mean, the data would have to be, so now that we're now proposing that forms be collected again in the districts that are currently not collecting forms because of the CEP program, those forms could be collected from 4-year-olds as well, and 3-year-olds for that matter. So I think in the future that is possible.
So when is the future?
Well, that's a good question. I think one decision that needs to be made is when the forms would begin to be collected again, and how long. Baltimore City being the largest jurisdiction that does not collect forms currently, how long they will need to
process
start that
and
back up
begin
again.
collecting the information.
They're doing a pilot program this year, but I think it's like 25 schools, maybe. It's not a very large number of schools.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, sir.
Delegate McIntosh.
I have a waiver.
There it is. It's on.
Aren't we giving them a waiver until a certain year? Baltimore City.
I think what you're referring to under current law,
Right.
there is a hold harmless provision in the compensatory education
Right.
formula that is essentially guaranteeing the proportion of free and reduced price meal students
Right.
the year prior to the entry into the community eligibility provision program is a guaranteed amount through fiscal 25 in current law. Yes.
Already.
Okay. The last item on this page, I think that I didn't cover, is career counseling. And so one of the other pieces that we talked about funding, the commission recommended, is funding for a career counselor in every middle school and high school. And I think we talked about at the last meeting that we've actually adjusted that number up a little bit to reflect the median size of schools. So if a larger high school would have more than one career counselor. And that would, the funding would be start in fiscal 24 for that. And that is the full state side of the funding for career counseling. So that would be in fiscal 24.
And that
That was pushed out from the original blueprint.
A little bit, I
Okay,
think.
just trying to get a sense of the smoothing. The smoothing that has been done to make it a more even requirement on the part of the state, is that mostly taken care of in the by 2024? You understand my question?
I think I do. So, I think if we go to the yellow page with the yellow on the top,
Right.
I think that might. So you can see the commission phase in would have funded, and this is just the state share.
Right.
In fiscal 21, 758 million, then the 1.4 billion, 1.6 billion, 1.7. So it was very, very front loaded.
Right.
So this is smoothing it much more, so more than just in the first couple of years.
Right.
And so proportionally, as each year as we get through each year,
Right.
we get closer and
Yeah, you can see.
cumulatively closer.
Right. You can see by your fiscal 25, the margin is less, and it keeps
Exactly.
getting less as you go along.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
That's
Does that-
helpful. Yes,
okay.
thank you.
Yep. Okay. So I think the next thing maybe to
Could you tell us, you're following the overview of the work?
sort of.
Okay, so what bullet are we on now, would you say?
Well, I would say we're definitely through the first page, and I do want to just note the last bullet on the first page. I think it
yes.
still is the last bullet.
Yes, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the senator's question regarding pre-K being included in the concentration of poverty. So for schools that do have all-day pre-K,
Full day.
full-day pre-K, those parents and students do fill out forms in order to get their lunch.
They fill out the forms.
They do.
Excellent. Right.
So
okay.
So the concentration of poverty, is that completely just based on lunch forms?
Well, so not in Baltimore City because
Well,
they don't collect forms.
Right.
Right. So that's
Outside of the districts that do not collect forms.
outside of the CEP districts. Yes, the count is based on forms for full day 4-year-olds, right?
Yes.
Obviously not the half day. Right.
Yes.
So
Once you start collecting.
So once you start collecting,
Okay.
right, so we're back, right. Once the forms are collected.
For you.
And I mean, I think that it's possible that the forms could be collected sooner than fiscal 25. The hold harmless is in statute currently until fiscal 25. But there could be, I don't know. Let's say they started collecting the forms in fall of 20, next fall, or fall of 21. Let's say fall of 21 would be like the full, that would be fiscal 23 funding. And it could be sort of a, we like to do this, right? Greater of. So it could be the greater of the hold harmless or the count through the forms. Something like that. Okay, so thank you, that's really helpful, thank you. The last bullet on the first page, I just wanted to point this out. I know Dr. Thornton had asked this question at the last meeting of whether the progressivity of the proposal, and absolutely under this proposal, the progressivity of the finance system, both state and local funding, would be significantly improved to what it is currently. Page 2, then, of the overview. I think what we will do is just walk through the county by county numbers for state and local funding. So the next sheet in your folder should be something called fiscal 2021 state funding. That is it, yes. So I talked about these components, but this shows you the components county by county. So for the college and career readiness, for the first column, these are dollars that are being provided for every student towards college and career readiness by 10th grade. And then for those who are not college and career ready by 10th grade, for the 11th and 12th grade, additional doing things differently, not just repeating the same class over again. And so that totals the $31.9 million. This is in fiscal 2021. The next two columns reflect the new funding formula that will be for the post college and career readiness and CTE pathways. This is based on the number of 11th and 12th graders who are college and career ready, and it provides the additional $500 in each 11th and 12th grade for these pathways to be more rigorous for CTE and for early college credit, including potentially earning an AA degree while you're still in high school. And so you can see the state aid and the local aid are basically the same amount, $10.1 million. In fiscal 21, as the transition year, the state would provide both the state and the local share of that funding. And beginning in fiscal 22, the state would provide the state share and the locals would be expected to pick up the local share. And then in the far right two columns is the funding for teacher supplies and technology. As I said, it amounts to about $83 per teacher in the state. And it is split. There's a state and a local split. And the in the first year, 21, the state is going to pick up both pieces. And starting in fiscal 22, again, the counties would be expected to pick up their share. There aren't any questions on fiscal 21. We can move to the next page, which is, it says state aid and local funding at the top. And it has the increases for fiscal 22 and 23. And it's a long sheet. It's a single long sheet. Okay. So this reflects the dollars that I discussed on the fiscal 20 to 24 page by program. This shows those dollars distributed through the formulas beginning in fiscal 22. The foundation formula beginning in fiscal 22 will be funded based on the greater of the September 30th count or the rolling 3-year average. The declining enrollment grants actually are already gone in current law, so we no longer have those. The NTI grants that are provided to the counties that benefited from the November NTI, using November NTI wealth, are also rolled into the foundation. There are some dollars provided to the counties that benefit from the September NTI count as a transition. And over time that would phase out. But for 22 and 23, those dollars are still provided under the state funding in addition to the supplemental grants. Staff has recommended eliminating those, and they would be eliminated but it would be a phase out after fiscal 23 out to sometime before fiscal 30. And so in the fiscal 22 column, you can see overall state aid is growing 450 million above current law. And you can see the amount of increase for each jurisdiction. The average increase is 8.2%. There are some a little lower and some a little higher. And then depending on whether you're looking at the dollars or the percent increases. In 2023, again, this also reflects inflation through the foundation each year. And you can see it is a total increase of $648.9 million in fiscal 23 over current law, which is 11.5%. And so as I talked about programmatically, so the dollars for college and career readiness, for the teacher supplies and technology, for the additional teacher salary increases in 22 and 23, for the post-CCR pathways, for concentration of poverty, for English learners, for special education, for transitional supplemental instruction, for pre-K. All of those are built into the numbers that you're seeing here, and these are the total increases for each county school system.
Yes, Secretary Brinkley.
I just want to clarify so I understand the column. But I understand this local share now. I'm looking at 22
right.
or 23.
Let me describe it. I hadn't gotten to those yet.
Okay.
All right. So that's the left side of the page is the state aid. The right side of the page is local funding. And what we've shown here, so the state aid is shown as increases over current law. The local share is shown as if the local share of all of the formulas was required to be funded by the counties in fiscal 22 compared to our projected local appropriation for each county, which is not a perfect match for MOE, but it is based on the trend line of what each county has been providing in the recent 5 to 7 years. And so then the difference.
County Executive Glassman has a question.
Just on that point, do these pretty much, if we're taking out the escalator, are you just using MOE where the counties currently are, where they currently are funding?
So for fiscal 22, we don't have a current funding. So this is the projected local appropriation in fiscal 22 based on enrollment growth in each county and the trend of what that county has been doing in the recent few years.
So last week we had a chart that had with the escalator in there. Are we going to get a chart without the escalator?
Yes. You have one, I think.
We can get to that.
That'd be great.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
But we're going off of what, so counties aren't going to be able to go backwards.
No, counties are definitely not going to be able to go backwards.
Okay, because some of the charts kind of show savings like they may have that option, but counties currently right now are going to go forward, not be able to go backwards on maintenance of effort.
No,
They may not have an escalator, but that where we're at today is the floor of where we're going.
Absolutely. I think there's something not in the folders. I need a clean folder to look through. But maybe this is somewhat helpful. I know this is all confusing. There's another page called local contribution. This is not about fiscal 22 or 23. This is about fiscal 30 when everything is fully implemented, but in fiscal $20. So because, again, we don't have a projected MOE appropriation for each county for each year. We've never needed that, so we don't have it. It's possible, but at this time we don't have it. So the way that we think about the comparison is to put it in $20 and then look at it against MOE under currently for this year, fiscal 20. And so the far left column is what the counties would be required to put in total if the local share of all of the formulas was required. So that is the $7.384 billion. The next column shows with this trigger that we've talked about for concentration of poverty, where only the counties that are benefiting from the compensatory education floor are actually paying the local share of concentration of poverty. So if we do that, then the next column shows the total local share with the dollars backed out for those counties that don't have to pay the local share of concentration of poverty. That's the $7,173,000,000. Okay. So then we're going to compare that $7.12 billion to the next column, which is what each county is spending in what each county is required to spend in fiscal 20 under MOE. So that's the $6.459 billion. So then the next column is the higher of those two columns, because in the future you're going to have to either do MOE based on the prior year appropriation times your new enrollment, or the local share of the formulas, whichever is higher. So this column shows which one is higher, and it varies by county. So Allegheny County, under if just paying the local share of the formulas, they would actually be able to reduce their appropriation a little bit compared to MOE, except if we're going to use the higher of, then they would not be able to back off their effort. And you can sort of run down and do that comparison for each one. So for Anne Arundel County, the local share of the formulas is more than what their MOE requirement is. So their new MOE would be the local share of the formulas. However, if you go to the far right column and look at the fiscal 20 appropriations, you can see that Anne Arundel County is funding more than MOE already. They're not funding the full local share amount that they would have to fund, but they're already above MOE. So the delta for them is not the comparison to the MOE column, it's the comparison to the fiscal 20 appropriations column. And that varies for each county, which is why there's not a difference column there.
Yes, Dr. Davis.
Yeah. Still staying with Anne Arundel County.
Yeah.
Example that you mentioned. In fiscal 22, their local share is 606, right? Is that what you're referencing?
Fiscal 22. I think you're on a different sheet.
I am. I thought you were going back and forth between the two. So I see. So you're just staying on this
Yeah, I was
sheet.
walking through all the
Understood.
columns on the local contribution sheet.
All right. I thought I was going here too. Okay.
We'll get back
I'm
to
okay.
that. We'll get back to that.
Secretary Brinkley, did you have your light on? No. Oh, okay. Okay, Delegate McIntosh.
So, for Baltimore City,
Yeah.
what they would have to increase their MOE. The difference would be between 280 and 534. Is that correct?
That is correct. At full implementation in
At
fiscal
full
30,
implementation.
but in current dollars.
In current. Got it.
So if we go back to that other sheet that Dr. Davis thought, thought I was looking at. So if you now go to the fiscal 22 set of local share versus appropriations, again, local appropriation is not a perfect match for MOE. It is more akin to the fiscal 20 column that we just talked about in terms of what's actually being appropriated. But you can see the counties that have a negative sign means they're putting in less than they would be required to if they had to pay the local share of all the formulas. So you can see who has some negatives. Baltimore City's obviously being the largest at 138.2 million. So that reflects paying the local share of all the formulas under current law, plus the increases and the new formulas that are provided funding for in fiscal 22.
So we saw a chart earlier
Right.
in the presentations showing that in today's world, Baltimore City is 25% behind in paying for the current equity formulas.
Right.
Currently.
Right.
So as we ramp this up over the next 2 years, that gap, of course, unless we require locals to do something about this gap, which I hope we will, would ramp up to 33.8%.
Right, by fiscal 23, exactly.
Thank you.
Well, yes, County Executive Glassman.
Dr. Cron, I'm sorry. One other, just while we're early in the process and we may have some more time, and there was a chart last week that was very helpful to counties that actually showed the percent of increase in 2030, a dollar amount and a percentage amount. And I don't know, some of the assumptions in the new charts change that, or is that chart still fairly accurate to share with counties on where they're going to be at?
So we have updated those charts, and they are the long sheets that are stapled together.
Okay.
So the second page. There's 2 pages.
Okay.
So the second page, but I guess page number 3, they're back to front. So 3 and 4 are the local share. On the first page, it's in fiscal $30. And on the second page, it's in fiscal $20.
Okay, that's correct.
It
but
doesn't have percent. I see it.
It doesn't have dollar amount or percentages
I see that.
clearly marked. I'm sure we can figure it out not to be.
Yes.
But since it's early, if maybe we could try to run those numbers prior to maybe lunchtime or something.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
Give me just 1 second. I'm looking for. I have another document that we need to make copies of. I'll email it for you. So there's another sheet that we have that we'll distribute soon that shows the impact of the escalator. So that's somebody asked about that. That's not in your folders, but it will be. We are. We're going with Greater Oak.
Yes, Senator Conway.
Yeah. Let me just ask you a question, because I'm getting real confused over here. The first question is relevant to my good friend from Harford County. So the inflationary factors that we're looking at now are the inflationary factors for 2020. It's not 2030. We don't even know what that number will be in 2030, right?
So the issue is that we don't know what the counties will spend in fiscal 2030. We have a projection of what the counties will spend based on what they've done in the past, but some of them are already spending well above MOE, and others are right at MOE. So the trend line for each county is different, and it's based on what they've done in the past. It's not attempting to calculate what the maintenance of effort requirement would be in each year for that county under the proposal.
Okay, let me just say this. I know very little. But realistically, for those counties who are not paying the full amount of MOU, what maintenance? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about because I'm thinking about an MOU that we're going to do shortly. But let me just ask you this: if they can't pay it now and the inflationary factor's not there, then what is the expectation for those impoverished counties to be able to pay it in the future?
It's not that we're not showing inflation. We're just.
No, let's not even deal with inflation. I'm just being realistic.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
I'm being realistic. So, no, factually, Baltimore City's behind now. We don't do maintenance of effort. We have not did the full implementation of maintenance of effort. So when it ramps up, then how do we pay it? You wanna?
Delegate. I mean, look.
I understand the need.
I
I understand that. But just giving the dynamics of specifically what's happening in the poor jurisdictions, especially in Baltimore City, I mean, it's dreamland to really sit here and believe that we will be able to pay it.
I don't know if it's dreamland, but if you really want me to get on my soapbox, I will. The city has found $300 million more for the police department in the last few years, and see where that got them. Over a period of about 7 or 8 years. There's some who believe, and I'm one of them, that $300 million invested up front in children, keeping schools open after school on Saturdays in the summer, providing education and cultural activities for kids might actually help the problem that the police have not yet been able to address.
With the juvenile.
Right. So I think that the city there's a number of things that we're going to have to do. One, we are making the concentration of poverty piece of it state only. Am I correct? Correct. We are going to, pardon me?
not for all counties, but for most.
Yeah, for most. Yeah, but for Baltimore City. Two, we do know that the city is getting wealthier. Last year they had a $50 million surplus. They're anticipating now a $38 million surplus. So maybe they can start budgeting in a way that some of that money goes up front to education instead of ends up in surpluses.
She said 38 million, maybe.
Yeah, I think I've heard it's about 38 million. So, up front, you can begin to do budgeting so that you're spending maybe 20 of that on schools and make that commitment. There are certain things that the city pays for now as in-kind services. And we may have to, at least with Baltimore City and Prince George's County, look at those in-kind services and actually look at every county and see if we should reset the MOE in a way that actually shows those expenditures. Right now, Baltimore City pays for all the crossing guards. They pay for some transportation. They pay for health officers. Maybe that should be counted now. Okay? I mean, there's other issues, other things that are kind of in and out of MOE now.
So what you're saying, I mean, I'm looking at what we should be paying, but you're saying that there's a possibility or a probability for the in-kind services and all, crossing guards and
We should look at that.
transportation. You're saying that it's feasible to put them in as a maintenance of effort.
I think that's a policy decision that we will make to try to help address that gap. Yes, but it's very feasible to look at that as one of the options. But here's the thing, Baltimore City mayor and city council, the next mayor and city council are going to have to look at their budget differently and come up with more money for education. Because the more we forgive at the back end, the more we hurt children who come from homes of poverty. It's just, if you forgive, if you'd say, okay, you can't, Baltimore City, you can't make up all that money. So we're going to forgive you. The only people that get hurt are the children. Only ones.
No, I'm definitely not advocating that the children, but I'm just saying realistically, when you look at the numbers, so I do understand what you're saying. Because see, I'm a policy person and y'all are the numbers people, but believe me, I can count.
Right.
And I'm just looking at that amount and what we were going to do with it. And what I'm saying, in the past, we just forgave it. We say we're going to forgive you.
Yeah, we did. I mean, in the past, we have
Because
not,
of the waiver. But what I'm saying,
we have not required local governments to, keep up with the equity pieces of our education formula. Therefore, we have produced together a statistic that says 53% of African American children in Maryland attend underfunded schools, while only 8% of white children attend underfunded schools. And to me, if there was one data point in Kerwin that I believe we need to attack and erase, both at the state level and at the local level, it is that. Now, this formula is, I'm giving my final speech right now, Dr. Kerwin. This formula addresses that. This formula is great. And I do think we have to press and work with our local government to figure out how they come up with this money. I do. And there are ways that we can help here, but there's also ways that they have to help back in the local level. I am not at all afraid to take this to City Hall and say, let's work together to figure out how we make this happen. There are items they can count that they're not counting.
But, okay. And I understand that. Madam Chair. All I'm saying is this, and I am in total agreement with you. Nobody fights harder for those disadvantaged students in the underfunded school. But what I'm saying that if in fact, we've been forgiven, and those jurisdictions have, and I am not saying that the money in Baltimore City should not be going to those underfunded schools.
Right.
You know how hard we worked for Baltimore City, for facilities, for funding, for building schools. All I'm saying that if in fact, so we're just coming up with a different measurement and to determine what the locals will have to pay and why. So you're saying that in the past, although we had just forgiven those local jurisdictions for not meeting maintenance of effort, right?
Well, we hadn't required them to keep up with the equity pieces of the formula.
Exactly. So now, in an effort for us to keep up with the equity pieces, and I'm concerned about all other jurisdictions, but I'm more specifically concerned about Baltimore City. So you're saying that there's a possibility and a probability that we can factor in-kind services, crossing guards, and transportation in an effort to meet our maintenance of effort.
I do think we can look at that, particularly for Prince George's and Baltimore City, who have been hit the hardest with increases in local contribution, yes. But if we do it for Prince George's and Baltimore City,
We have to do it for everybody, in
Everybody,
fairness.
that's right.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. It's not just about Baltimore City. And I'm just saying then when we do that, then what impact does it have on the state formulas?
It just
It
means
shouldn't have any.
it doesn't have any, and it means that Baltimore City leaders, city council, the new city council, and the new mayor next year will have to look at their own budget and reprioritize, I think, education, just as we have at the state level in the Thornton experience and in the Kerwin experience. We've renewed our priority to the children of Maryland, and I think Baltimore City will have to do the same. I mean, as you know, there are very few schools open on weekends or in the summers or after hours, and this is what that population of students really need. So we're going to help, but they have to help too.
No doubt. Now, Rachel, can I regress just a little bit? Then I'm done. Hopefully, I'm done. You know, when we really talked about it's local contribution, but when you were talking about the funding, what happens to career? What happens to, does the funding still remain intact for the P-TECH schools?
Under continue on under current law. Those dollars have not been touched. Yes, the funding is still there for PTEC.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you. And thank you, my delegate, Madam Chair.
Rachel, I'm sorry to go back to the little sheet since I was not completely focused on the little sheet when I should have been. And taking a look at Prince George's County, and I'm on the fourth column, the FY20 MOE actual was 701, current, right? But what was appropriated by the county was 786. Is that accurate? And so that is above MOE?
Above MOE, but it is less than what they would be required to put
Under the new formula.
Exactly.
But over the last several years, I believe Prince George's County has given above MOE. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So just on that point, County Executive Glassman asked for some data, which we're putting together, and we will have for you. It is essentially a different version. I mean, it's essentially in fiscal $30, this chart that we've done for you in fiscal $20. We did it for you in fiscal $20 because that is a direct comparison to what we know the counties are spending in fiscal 20, as opposed to our projection of what they might spend in fiscal 30. But we are putting those numbers together for you, so we'll have those shortly.
Yes, Kenny, and I agree with that. We need to show that. But so when you say 701 to 786, we know that you cannot go to 701. You funded 786. So I don't think it's quite fair to say, you're getting that it's working to your advantage, that somehow you're going to start at 701. You're always going to start at that higher number, right? I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that.
So the way maintenance of effort works, what you're spending above MOE sometimes counts towards MOE and sometimes it doesn't. So the dollars that Prince George's County is spending in fiscal 20, that is more than they're required to under MOE, but that counts toward MOE will get rolled in to the calculation for fiscal 21, and that will become the new fiscal 21 MOE.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I say counted toward. Right.
Can I just question on that the 701 is the per pupil amount.
No,
Right.
that's the total. I mean, it's the total amount. Okay. Current local maintenance of effort law is our two prong, right? The local
Yeah.
share of the foundation, and then everyone's above that. And then
Recurring
the
costs.
prior year appropriation on a per pupil basis, then multiplied by your new enrollment.
Right.
So it's a per pupil amount that then equals a total of, in Prince George's County, $701.1 million in fiscal 20.
And 786 this year is what was actually provided, a check, or there were funds delivered from the county to the school board in
Correct.
the total amount. That 86, though, is probably not per pupil funding, not based on a per pupil. It's probably some service or other technology. I don't know what
It has to be an actual appropriation to the school system. So it can't be, to Senator Conway's question, it can't be other dollars that the county is spending on for the system, but if it's not in the appropriation, it doesn't count. For Prince George's County, it's a pretty big delta, and the reason is sort of specific to Prince George's County. It relates to the telecommunications tax that the county does provide to the school system every year, but it is exempted from the MOE
Got it.
calculation. So Prince George's is not the best example to get a sense of the delta between what you're spending in MOE is not usually that large every year. So Prince George's is kind of a unique situation.
Okay.
So, Anne Arundel would be a more, something to compare where you can see their MOE in 20 is $690.5 million. They're actually appropriating $733.3 million. So they went, well above MOE. I think we know that they did do that in fiscal 20, and so their fiscal 21 MOE amount will be higher.
Move on.
So I think we've, in a not linear way, covered most of the documents in the folder. We do have a handout on MOE and the impact of the escalator and the greater of calculation. We could go ahead and hand that out. But I think that sort of in terms of what you're deciding today, I think one of the issues is based on the conversation we just had, at what point would the local share of the formulas be required for all counties? Under the proposal that in all the numbers that you have, it is immediate starting in fiscal 22. Every county would be required to fund the local share of all the formulas. Whether that is what you want to recommend or you want a phase-in of that. When the escalator, the MOE escalator would be eliminated. And I think if you were immediately going to require the local share to be funded, then it would also make sense to eliminate the escalator at the same time. If there's a phase-in of the local share, you probably want to keep the escalator and phase it out over time so that you're making sure counties are at least maintaining the MOE effort. I'm sorry.
We have a question from Senator.
How would you phase out the escalator? So I guess what I mean is not phase it out, but in what year it would be eliminated. Yeah, end it, but end it after some portion of the local share is required by all the counties. Yeah.
By phasing in the local contribution for all the other formulas, are you talking about, I mean, would an example of that be like 25%, 50, 75, and
Right.
hitting 100?
Yes, something like that. Exactly. Exactly.
And do you have magically a chart available that?
We do not.
Oh, okay. So,
But we've given you enough numbers that I think we can do the math.
if only we had had the benefit of the funding in these formulas, we'd be able to do the math. So, or Dr. Kerwin can do the math, the math professor. So is that, I mean, I think it does, I mean, recognizing the comments that Senator Conway made, it does seem hard to envision a jump up of this magnitude for some jurisdictions. And so phasing it in, I mean, if the commission's pleasure, 4 years, 5 years, you know, in 25% increments or 20% increments. Shoot, I mean.
Delegate Mack.
And looking at every year, the mayor, whoever he or she is, has brought in this sheet and said, look at all the in-kind services we provide. And they're not under MOE, and I think there's reasons they're not on both sides of the ledger. I do think for Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and a couple of other counties where you have this really incredible delta, we have to sit down with the schools, the budget director, you know budget directors, and all of us here, and figure out that transition. But in the final analysis, counties, I'll only speak for one, that have not been keeping up with the equity piece of our formula, I think must at some level begin to make that attempt locally to figure out how they can do that. And I think they can. I mean, I have evidence that they can. Evidence through kinds of surpluses they carry. And there is just, I think, I mean, if in 3 years of sitting here through the Kerwin experience, you know, if there's one thing I know, this is the moment we have to ask ourselves and local government to dig deep. Otherwise, we'll be here 15 years from now, and we won't have changed the data.
Point. Thank you. On the point to the contributions that the local governments are making to school services, but not to the school system, I think several of the counties make a pay for the health service out of their local government and not the school system. But that is obviously that is a benefit to the school system. Are you talking about sort of phasing in, allowing that contribution to be counted towards the overall local effort to the school system, even though that program might always remain in the city or county government, because you'd be changing a lot. I mean, you would be there are a lot of obligations and entanglements that are put into.
This is something that we can't resolve here. It has to be negotiated between the budget, the city or county, and health departments, and so on and so forth. It can't be negotiated here. There are lots of entanglements. You're correct. We have to figure that out.
So is the concept that you're putting on the table not kind of what I was hearing from DLS, which was the whole idea of, in my mind, a step up, 20%, 40%, or is it pick a day, 2025?
I'm going with the step up, but saying that I believe in at least two counties where we have, that I'm aware of, where we have that the step up would be enormous. We may want to look at ways in which we incorporate some, not all, but some of the already expenditures that the local government's doing.
The operating expenditures
Yeah,
that the local government is doing.
we may. And look, I haven't looked into this deeply, but Rachel, the healthcare costs, retiree healthcare costs, some counties count that under MOE, right? Right. Some counties don't. I mean, what's the logic here? And I think we need to look at these, particularly if they will help in what, Senator Conway describes as something that's impossible. I don't think it's at all impossible. No.
I'm appropriately being disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
No, I did not say that it was impossible. I'm just trying to figure out how you're going to get there.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is it legislatively that you make that determination, or is it a budget concept that you put in there? I just didn't understand how we were going to get there. Sir Conway never said it was impossible.
No. All right, I'm sorry, but it is. I think it's post us adopting this formula. I think it's legislatively and working very closely with the locals to try to get there. And I will also say for Baltimore City and Prince George's County and for anybody, I think there is also a philanthropic role that could be looked at. I mean, I will say that because, as a matter of fact, the chair and I are meeting this week on Wednesday for 2 hours with a group in Baltimore City to say, here's the step up, here's what's going to be required in Baltimore City, and we are actually, I think, going to try to begin a dialogue to make a very strong pitch to other organizations that say, we need to help Baltimore City's children. This is a way you can do it.
Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to observe that, historically, there have been other examples and precedents when there have been costs that have moved from the local government side into the schools column and counted towards maintenance of effort. And in the city, that led to an increased contribution, and there might be additional opportunities along those lines. And just like the discussion that we've had about, I don't want to say a more gradual, but a more regular level of increase in terms of the state contribution and, having a better kind of a plane there. When you look at the talking points on the work group proposal, on the state side right now, we're talking about the reality is that education funding hasn't even been growing at the rate of general fund growth. And there are many formulas in state government right now that are pegged to general fund growth. That's a conversation I think many of the local jurisdictions are going to have as well in terms of if they're going to make education a priority, setting minimum thresholds in terms of what they're going to capture in the way of annual revenue growth and dedicate towards education is going to be part of, I think, everybody's capital stack in terms of paying for these types of increases going forward. So, obviously there's the devil's in the detail, but I think that there are opportunities that are available. I just wanted to make that point.
Observations on this point? Yes, Senator Madaleno.
Do you need a motion or a proposal? I mean, we've sort of talked about doing a phase in, but we haven't talked about how to phase it in. And is it enough to do it over a 5-year, in 20% increments over 5 years?
You want to
Rachel, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I was just going to say, so thinking about Baltimore City, which is the biggest increase, just to match the current fiscal 20 share of formulas is about 96 million. And then we know by 22, it's 23, that's up to 152 million. So if you were going to spread that over 5 years, that would be like 30 million increase a year in the city's contribution.
I think the mayor's office would have to weigh in on whether or not, how this could happen. And I do know that the mayor has absolutely said that they are looking for ways to meet their obligation. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but he is. They are looking for opportunities. They have are going to be introducing a budget next year that will reflect an increase in education funding. I mean, that's a pledge he has made. So I don't know what the increase is. I know it's substantial, but I don't know what it is.
So I think Senator Madaleno has put a proposal on the table that the local share of the formula funding be phased in over a 5-year period. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Starting in 22.
Starting in fiscal 22. Yeah. So, Mr. Gallagher.
I ask, why would we have to specify the phase-in period here as opposed to just articulating it should be phased and let that play out, in terms of the budget negotiations and the General Assembly's contemplation of this?
Would you consider that a friendly?
He's saying
No, he's not. He's saying that you're modifying.
Just to add, another piece of perspective here, the work of the commission has gone on for years, and the work group has gone on for months. And you have 39 recommendations from the commission that we're supposed to distill into an operable formula. And despite a lot of confusion and faux outrage and misinformation, it's not this group's charge to figure out how to pay for it. Although we probably have a lot of good ideas and a lot of good thoughts along those lines. I think as we're operationalizing this formula, replacing a formula that no longer works so that we don't have bridges and down payments and, grants to jurisdictions with declining enrollment, which are, all other terms for patches, we should be preserving and providing as much flexibility as possible. Here's how you implement it. Here's how you have a formula that reflects the values of the commission. But then there has to be a level of detail that's going to have to get worked out because there are so many moving parts. So that would be the way I would frame my friendly amendment.
If I could, Mr. Gallagher, could you just state again what you're suggesting?
That the ramp up of the local contribution should be phased to reflect the realities faced by local jurisdictions and should be taken into consideration as we move forward. That we can approve, we can recommend a formula and that we can leave the phase in, particularly of the local share, to be determined as the legislation is taken up and considered by the General Assembly. Presuming that there's not going to be a proposal from the administration.
Put on the table. Is there a second? The motion's been seconded. Discussions. Dr. Thornton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I support this. The only thing I wanted to ask us to do as we are making these adjustments, as I said at the last meeting, there are implications for the academic and student development expectations. And so as we are smoothing out, as you say, it's be very important to see some asterization, a new word, right, coming from the state board as to what we're willing to accept in terms of lower student performance that will be the result of this. That is very important because we are making budget decisions here and what counties can pay for and what state can pay for. And the commission has laid out a student performance and development concept that is based upon what should be done now. And we're saying there are certain things that cannot be done, and I understand that. But there are implications of that. So I'd like to see that language coming from this group as it passes its recommendation on to the commission, because there are implications, particularly in counties like Prince George's and City of Baltimore. There are certain things that are going to result from our not being able to fund at the level that we are expecting.
Ms. Pasteur?
Thank you. I also support this, and I support Dr. Thornton's comments and the comment that I heard from previous speakers about counties other than Prince George's County or Baltimore City. I recognize that it is not the work of this work group to try to figure out from where the money comes. But certainly, I think the discussion that has ensued is far more than a philosophical one. It's a real one. And while we are here doing the work of this group, there is a level of perseverating from this group and other groups in terms of the funding. But the one thing we cannot perseverate about is what goes on with our children, what is happening. That's not going to come to a standstill. So I guess my feeling here, it's not a question, I'm not sure what it is, but I feel I have a sense or a wind of while we're doing what it is that we're doing, that I'm not seeing who the people are who are going to ultimately make this decision, when they are going to make the decision, what's their thinking in making the decision. Because as someone has pointed out, we went through Thornton, and now we've been going for several years through Kerwin, and the children are still not getting the services. So, albeit it is not our role to make the decision about where the money is coming, I just can't leave here without someone helping me, because all of you have done this dance before. This is my first time at this party, but it is not my first time in what needs to be done and servicing the children in the state of Maryland, and it won't be my last. So I want to hear something concrete about what happens next. That's why I like the motion. At least it takes a little bit of the bear off of the locals' backs, because we have cried in Baltimore County. The county executive went over the previous MOE. So to think that we're going to continue to have to look for more money is ludicrous. But at the beginning and the middle and the end of this is about children. I would just like to know what happens with this pot now, because this is the thing about which people in the streets, if you will, are speaking. This is the real fiber, the real discussion about why any of us are doing this. And I hope in my ramblings there's some sense here. Maybe not, but I got it out. And so somebody help me.
Well, thank you for your those comments. you know, I think we all share your concern about ensuring that we are getting the funds and the programs to the children of the state, to all the children of the state. And I think what we're talking about now is just the pace at which this will occur over the next 10 years. But significant funds to meet what you want to see achieved and what we all want to see achieved will start flowing immediately. So there will be an immediate impact on the children in our schools. Let me see if there is, yes, Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the proposal. I want to make a quick thought off of Mr. Gallagher's comment about the presumption that the administration will not be putting forward a proposal. I don't have that presumption. I assume in the governor's comments about this work and the work that's happened over all these years, and that in calling this proposal half-baked, that the administration is working behind the scenes to put forward its own formula. And so I fully expect to see the administration and invite the administration to put forward an alternative formula that incorporates a lot of the feedback from this commission, and would expect, as the governor said, that education is a top priority, that they are working currently behind the scenes to try to put something together. And so I just don't want to sort of let it sit out there that the presumption is that the administration wouldn't. I would expect the governor would be putting something forward.
Well, to your point, I noticed that a member of the governor's staff commented in the paper today that the governor liked some of the proposals in the commission report. Yes, Senator Conway.
Yes, I'm in favor of the amendment. I don't even really have a problem with it. I just think it probably should be a little more specific. Because, in terms of the items, if we're going to make the adjustment and allow for those in-kinds, I'm in definite agreement with it. I don't want anybody to think that I'm not. But I'm concerned about every jurisdiction, and primarily I am definitely concerned about Baltimore City. But what I'm saying is, are we saying when we do this, because obviously we've been forgiven in the past, and I think that those funds should be dedicated to education. My only other question is, do we allow it to be done in legislation? We need to say that, but we need to be more specific to say that if in fact, because see, the locals are primarily the ones who may have to make the decision on where that money is going to come from or what allocation. So the only place I'm confused here, and I'm in total agreement because I think I started this mess, as you could say, in terms of the discussion. But what I'm saying is, do you say, we know it's going to be legislative, but in the legislation, according to the wisdom of the legislature, do you make the determination, and we should not make the determination. The locals should make the determinations on where it should be coming from. For an example, right? If we say that if the local makes a see, most of them, like Chairman McIntosh is saying, they're paying it. They are already paying it. And you know as well as I do, Matt, but it's not a direct disbursement directly to the education system. And that's where it becomes problematic to me. So are you saying that it has to go through a budgetary process allocated specifically to education? Because, I know many of our legislators here, and if we don't have specifics in terms of why they're being forgiven, for an example, if you say, okay, you can do in-kind. Oh, I can come up with all kind of in-kind. You see what I'm saying? But what I'm saying, are you saying in this specifically that if we allow this and the legislators agree with it, that it has to be automatically funneled through and allocated to the education system? That's my only question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I would just say that having had the benefit of working at the local level and at the state level, you always want to preserve and provide as many options as possible. And in putting forward the idea a few minutes ago, my only thought was this work group has our charge has been to be faithful to the recommendations of the commission and to put together a formula that distills those recommendations into an operable formula, because we have a formula and a series of patches that no longer work. I think that as we approve a formula that has aspirational elements, has realistic elements, and as we've had a conversation about maybe how we ramp up on the state side, we understand that there has to be some type of ramp up on the local side. We've already conceded 21 as a transition year. We are having this pretty robust conversation about what counts towards maintenance of effort, what does count, what doesn't count, what's in kind, what the options are. Some jurisdictions who might be at certain limits in terms of their taxing capacities, others might not. That's a lot for us to navigate. All I'm saying is that if we remain faithful to our charge to approve a formula that is consistent with what the commission laid out, historically, we've had 50-50 cost share between local and state government in terms of funding education. There's nothing new in that sense. And richer jurisdictions have contributed more, poorer jurisdictions have contributed less, reflective of the adequacy and equitable requirement that's in the state constitution. So all I'm saying is we can approve the formula. We can make things more realistic in terms of the phase-in on the state side. We acknowledge the fact that you have to have a phase-in on the local side, and we really need to spend, not this group, but the legislature is going to have to reflect on what should count, what shouldn't count, and what the options are. So if I can make it a little bit more precise, it's still approving the same formula, and it's still adopting the same 10-year outlook and the same aspirations, but it is leaving a little bit of work to the General Assembly in terms of figuring out what's going to count and what the appropriate phase-in schedule is on the local side. And my comment, specific to the administration, I didn't mean to be flip in any way, shape, or form, but given the public comments that have been out there and what to date has been the deference to the General Assembly to make these changes on the education funding formula side, my presumption was that it's going to fall back onto this group who recommends to the commission, who recommends, ultimately to the governor and the General Assembly, and, just to explain it a little further.
Okay, other comments, suggestions? Seeing no, yes, did you want to make?
Well, we do have the information that the county executive asked for. I don't know.
Okay, but we're on Matt's proposal. Yeah. Yeah. We're voting on the proposal that Matt has Mr. Gallagher's put forward. So, seeing no lights on, I'm going to ask all in favor, please say aye. Yes, please.
Yes.
Well, I think Senator Madaleno said that he considered this a friendly amendment.
So it's a motion by both.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's a joint motion, I guess. All right. So did somebody have?
Ferguson seconded it. So.
Yes. Okay. So you want Senator Secretary Brinkley? Okay. Matt, Mr. Gallagher, I hate to ask you to do this again, but if you don't mind.
That the work group, in the act of approving its recommendations for the new funding formula that will go to the commission, acknowledges the fact that there would need to be a phase-in of the increase in the local contribution, given the realities and the facts that there are many moving parts as it relates to local contribution and what counts and what doesn't count, that ultimate decision would have to be resolved in the legislation in terms of what the timing of the phase-in is on the local share and contributions and what gets defined as a local share and contribution. I think that's,
helpful.
It's not my best work in terms of, I didn't polish that up, but I think that captures the essence of what I was suggesting.
So let me ask all in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no? Pass. Okay. So, yes, please.
It's well intentioned.
Yeah,
I'm looking at the 4 key issues I see as this work group,
right,
and that's not one of them.
okay,
It is helpful, I think, to the Kerwin,
right,
but that's not one of our 4 charges.
okay. Understand. Thank you. Okay. Rachel, what is the next step?
Well, so we do have the information that County Executive Glassman asked for, and you've been handed out to you. Here's yours, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And just wanted to share that and I guess explain it. So this is essentially comparing, the other chart compared fiscal 20 version of this. This is fiscal 30 with what DLS is projecting the local appropriation will be in fiscal 30, what the local share of all the formulas will be in fiscal 30. That's the 8.878 billion. And then the higher of, the greater of, would be the requirement under for the local contribution, ultimately under MOE. And so then there is a difference column now and a percent increase. So you can see the in the difference column, that's the amount in fiscal $30 that each county would have to contribute if they don't have a zero towards fully funding MOE or the local share of the formulas, and then the percent increase, which is 15%. So it's gone down a little bit compared to the prior chart due to the decision to fund the local share of the concentration of poverty grant for most of the counties. So it's a little lower than the numbers you were looking at.
Is that helpful? Yes, okay. Yes, please, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Rachel, perhaps for you, although it's related to a question that Secretary Brinkley asked at the start of this, which is the 4th bullet on the overview of the workgroup proposals looked at what the fiscal 30 impact of state aid would be versus current law of a $2.8 billion increase. Is it safe to say, based on the chart that you just provided us, that the comparable data point for local governments would be a $1.2 billion increase over current law? Thank you.
Okay. Rachel, are there other items we...
At this point, if there aren't more questions, I know we do have lunch here, but at this point, I think it's a question of whether you're ready to move forward.
There's been an awful lot of information and data put before us, so we have come to the point where it's time to make a decision. So let me ask my colleagues if they would rather take a lunch break and have a chance to think about all this, or do we want to move on? We would not, if we took action and finished, we wouldn't come back. So do people want a break, or, yes, County Executive Glassman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like at least 30 minutes to consult some of the counties and run that last chart.
Okay, so I think that's a reasonable request. So let me, Rachel, is lunch ready?
It is.
Okay, so let me suggest it's 11, almost 11:30, that we try to come back at 12 o'clock and grab a bite to eat. Okay? Thank you.